I know Trent is not exactly the bastion of defensive stability.
He's not Paolo Maldini as a fullback, is he? No.
Not quite.
Because Saka, when we started doing the podcast, I was saying, well, he's absolutely nailed on. Viewed it as purely a kind of two-squad basis and kind of the players who played lots of minutes get the first week off. That England will be taking the best number 9, I think, of current form to the World Cup.
Welcome to Make Football Great Again, the podcast that's not only your definitive 48-nation roadmap to the 2026 World Cup, but is also giving you the ultimate inside track on the race for a place in England's World Cup squad this summer. I'm Harry Brent and I'm joined as ever by the Mirror's chief football writer John Cross as we bring you the latest instalment of our England player rating series as we count down the days to the biggest party of the summer, the FIFA World Cup. We've got England versus Uruguay in a friendly coming this Friday. John, I'll get your thoughts on that in a little bit, but I just want to start with the Carabao Cup final. You were there at Wembley, 2-0 win for Manchester City, the kings, undisputed kings of the League Cup in recent years, it's fair to say. Denying Arsenal their first League Cup triumph since 1993, denying them the first trophy in 6 years, and denying them the chance to win, potentially, an unprecedented quadruple. Thomas Tuchel was at Wembley watching the game. What do you think he will have noticed? Looking out across the few England players in action there. What would he have noticed?
Well, I think that would have reinforced his view that just how good Nico O'Reilly is.
Yes, both goals he scored. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I thought it was fantastic. I mean, listen, we've been championing Nico O'Reilly, haven't we? And basically, I think Lewis Hall has maybe closed the gap a little bit lately. We've sort of kind of said and acknowledged that. But I do have to say, I think, that looks a little bit parochial, frankly, a little bit local with people championing Lewis Hall because basically compared to Nico O'Reilly, who's looked an absolute force, actually was only 21 on Saturday, wasn't he? What a weekend he's had. But also it just kind of puts it into context. A few people sort of saying, oh, well, Lewis Hall's such a bright young English talent. Well, no, O'Reilly's put him in the shade a bit there, hasn't he, really, and proved a bit of a point, I think, particularly starting from left-back, but also powering forward and being an absolute monster in the opposing box, which was a really strong statement. So I think he would have noted that. I think he would have slightly looked on in horror about Eze missing. And seen that as a typical example of kind of the season catching up with a few players, as it indeed perhaps has done a little bit with a few Arsenal players, Bukayo Saka, Declan Rice. And I think he would have also seen that Pep Guardiola is a tactical magician, frankly. Guardiola, I mean, he's won it 5 times, which is more than double Arsenal have won in their history. But he has a love affair with this competition. I thought it was a level pegging, bit of a turn-off first half. In the second half, I just thought City were brilliant in their high press. But they did one notable thing, which I thought was different, which was they pressed onto every Arsenal defender, but they let Kepa have the ball. And I just thought that was so telling because, frankly, he's not that great anymore, Kepa as a goalkeeper. And basically, it just makes ridicules that argument about giving your number 2 goalkeeper a chance. I just can't stand that. So, it's not a charity. We're in the business of winning here, and I just don't get it. Who cares? Be ruthless. Go with your best players. I mean, otherwise, do you want to put out all the reserves in the 1 to 11? I just don't get it with the goalkeepers. Fine, play the rounds. But when it comes to the final, put your best players in. It's nonsense.
Yeah, and of course, Kepa has previous in the League Cup final against Man City, doesn't he? 2019, refusing to come off after seemingly some sort of mix-up with Chelsea boss Mauricio Sarri.
That's putting it nicely.
That's putting it very nicely. Just going back to Nico O'Reilly, you mentioned, he kind of effectively proved, look, I'm still the man at left-back. If he does indeed get the nod for England at the World Cup, should Tuchel consider deploying him in this kind of inverted midfield kind of role he's been playing for Man City? Still a left-back on paper, but allow him to kind of drift inside and use that physicality that you've talked about being a really big asset of his, obviously playing a big part in the goals he scored as well. Is that something England should consider?
Yeah, I do think so. I think that you could deploy that on either side. That's the one thing I would say. The inverted fullback trend, we've stopped talking about it a little bit, but I tell you what, City do still do it well, when they do deploy it. But I do think you've got options there with O'Reilly on the left. And if Reece James was fit for the right, then he also could do similar. I mean, he even starts in midfield, doesn't he, just like O'Reilly? So they've both mastered that position. But I do think O'Reilly is really... I love the fact that he's just a kind of homegrown Man City product, big fan, just a homegrown talent, and I think he's got lots to offer. But I do think that physicality could be really telling, because I think that Lewis Hall is a bit more traditional left back and, a good player in his own right, please don't get me wrong. But I just think if you want to see a powerhouse and kind of someone that's going to own that side and then be able to invert as well, then I think O'Reilly's that option. And I think numbers in the heat and searing conditions, players who are adaptable and can do different things, I think could be really important for overloads and kind of significant tactical switches during games, which I think are going to be important in the searing heat and conditions in the summer.
I guess you'll also have that, if he's playing as we expect him to, next to Mark Gahey, you'll have that City connection as well.
Absolutely.
Another slightly below par performance by Bukayo Saka. Why hasn't he been at his electrifying best that we know he can hit? Arsenal are having a great season. They still could win the treble. He's obviously their attacking talisman. Why hasn't he been quite at it? And is this a bit of a worry for England?
Yeah, it is. I do think it's a concern. I think he's a really big player for Arsenal. I mean, that's obvious, and he's done brilliantly in the last few seasons. Listen, if you're a bit of an outsider, you're immediately going to point to Saka saying he's a crucial player, but he just hasn't delivered enough this season. And I think that is a concern. I mean, he still gets the armband when sort of Odegaard's not there. That tells you about his leadership and his quality in that regard. But I just don't think his output or his form is enough. And frankly, it really shows. And I think there's always this argument when Saka plays well, Arsenal play well. And he is so dangerous, but it feels to me like we've probably had 2 or 3 really good games, outstanding games, but we just haven't seen him hit anywhere near his levels this season. And I think it's a really strange one for me, this, because Saka, when we started doing the podcast, I was saying, well, he's absolutely nailed on. The longer this goes on, I do think, listen, I think he's absolutely in pole position. Stop it, you're winding me up now. But no, stop it, because I do love Saka. I've said a few times, he's probably, when he's playing well, he's probably my favourite player. But I do think he's just nowhere near, and he'd know that. I mean, you've got to be realistic about that. But I do think that, I just think he's entertaining, he's bright, he's a character, he's a personality, he's a leader. He's absolutely everything that sort of Arsenal want and England want. But I do feel as if he's just not hitting the heights consistently enough. And that kind of the big game factor worried me. I mean, he always delivers for England. He's so important for England.
I think that's crucial,
Yeah, and I think if you're England manager, you've got to keep that in mind, and I think he will keep that in mind, and I think that's why I think he's definitely still in pole position. But, he's got to improve. He's got to improve, and he'll know that in the running.
Got to talk about James Trafford. In ahead of Gianluigi Donnarumma for Man City, made a few, really important saves, particularly early on. That triple save he made in the first 5 minutes or so. Did his performance on Sunday suggest that he's got to be the number 2 for England at the World Cup, in the sense that he's obviously been biding his time on the sidelines for City. He's, when he's had to come in, generally speaking, not every single time, but generally speaking, he's put in good performances. And obviously on Sunday, that's a big performance against big opposition. We expect it's going to be Jordan Pickford, playing every minute of the World Cup for England. But if Pickford were to drop a couple of clangers, or if he got injured, England would need somebody to be that we'd be confident we can drop him in and he'd produce, against, in important games, under pressure, against big opposition. Did Trafford prove that he's the man to do that on Sunday?
Yes and no, because I think Dean Henderson will be number 2. Absolutely convinced of it. It's so interesting. Just going back briefly to that squad on Friday, I viewed it as purely a kind of 2-squad basis. And kind of the players who played lots of minutes get the first week off. And basically then they come in, the other lads, kind of the stiffs, if you like. That's harsh, but, basically then go home. Yeah. And actually, that's how I viewed it. But then I had a phone conversation with a colleague of ours, and basically who rang me on Friday afternoon and said, they're the untouchables. And basically, I thought that was a really interesting way to look at it. You've kind of got this gang of, 10 or 12 players who kind of have played 3,500 minutes plus, of all kind of the players in sort of European competition, that sort of stuff. And one of them is Dean Henderson. And look, I had no doubt about it, but basically Dean Henderson has, basically played a lot of minutes, hasn't he? And sort of kind of, and also, he's started games, and I think he's elevated himself to number 2. I think the battle is for number 3. And I think that there must be concern about who's the number 3. And I know people say, it's only a third choice keeper. You never know, you never know. Basically, in 2010, Fabio Capello blew the doors off and basically said, OK, it's a free-for-all. Basically, I'm not sure who is going to play in the next game. And all 3 were in the mix. So, someone makes a clanger, basically, it could happen sort of thing. And I just thought Trafford, actually, from a position where I thought he looked quite weak, and basically I thought, not sure about him. Ramsdale's playing at Newcastle, so basically if he's playing... I thought what Trafford showed was that, yes, he doesn't play very often, but when he does, he's still capable of good stuff. And I thought actually that was quite a strong performance. I would have thought that would take, some beating actually for third choice keeper. I mean, I know that kind of... We have this old argument and say, kind of, when I lambast kind of, Arteta for using Kepa and rather than Raya, then people immediately say, oh, yeah, but look at City, they're using the number 2 goalkeeper, which is fine, I get that. But please, there's less of a gap between, Donnarumma and Trafford than there is between Raya and Kepa. It's as simple as that. You don't have to be, a genius to work that out. And I think then that basically Trafford, I just think is a really, good goalkeeper. I do think that Donnarumma's better, in my view. I understand why they went out and did Donnarumma, because early on Trafford did make a few mistakes when he was kind of adjusting to City. But I think he showed on Sunday that he's more than capable of being England's, kind of a squad member for the World Cup this summer.
Has he got to leave on loan or permanently in order to get his England...
Well, from all the noises, I think it would be really difficult to imagine that basically Trafford would be, happy as Larry at City next season. I think that's the problem. So I think he's made it pretty clear that actually he was thought he was going to be coming in as City number 1, and by the end of, August, he's now all of a sudden found himself usurped by a lot of people's choice as the best keeper in the world. Personally, I don't see it like that. With Donnarumma, I think he is definitely one of the best 3, but I don't think he's head and shoulders the best because he can make the odd, mistake on crosses and what have you, So there are strengths and weaknesses to it. But I do think that Trafford will probably say, do you know what, in the summer, I need to get out for the future of my career. Because I think he went to City hoping to be number 1 to strengthen his claims to be England number 1. So that's the level of his ambition, which I admire, to be honest. I like it.
You mentioned the England squad announcement, which was on Friday. I just want to touch on a few players who didn't make the cut. Danny Welbeck had a very good weekend, scored both of Brighton's goals against Liverpool in a 2-1 win. Left out in favour of Dominic Solanke and Dominic Calvert-Lewin. Why do you think Tuchel didn't pick him? Is it just that he doesn't fancy him? Is it his age? He's 35 now. Is he the wrong sort of profile? What's Tuchel's thinking?
Well, he's up there with English goal scorers, isn't he? So I don't know, because it did surprise me a bit, because I just thought that because Tuchel had previously referenced him and saying how close he was last time, I did actually think, I wonder whether he'll get in. Maybe he thinks the other 2 might be longer-term options. I'm a big Calvert-Lewin fan. I do like Calvert-Lewin. I think he's good. I think he's just obviously Leeds have dried up a bit goals wise, so therefore so has he. But it's I was a bit surprised, I'll be honest, because I think Welbeck, not only has he been scored twice on Saturday, but he's also been good from the bench. He's a good squad member. Maybe it's this chance to look at elsewhere. Look, I like Solanke, but I don't personally think Solanke's quite England World Cup material. I'll be honest. And I think he might well be in the future, but I think it's hard to make that case in a struggling Spurs side. He's had one or two injuries as well, and basically missed games, and therefore I think not so sure about it. So that was the element that surprised me a bit. So I was a bit surprised. I wasn't surprised almost to see Calvert-Lewin. I think he's done enough to earn that this season. I think he's been good in every aspect of his play. Whereas I think Welbeck, not ahead of Solanke, who's had a very stop-start season, please don't get me wrong, I think Solanke's been good in moments. But I think injuries and club form, i.e. the form of his club, really kind of held him back a bit. So I was a bit surprised at that, So, yeah, that was one that sort of surprised me out of the omissions, definitely.
Ollie Watkins was another omission up front. Back in the goals at the weekend, scoring in Villa's 2-0 win over West Ham. Out of him and Welbeck, who do you think is more likely to break back into the England squad? Obviously, Welbeck has been having a good, consistent season domestically, whereas Watkins hasn't particularly. But Watkins has obviously got that recent experience of having that big role at the Euros, scoring goals, having success there. Who's more likely out of the two, do you think, to break back in?
Watkins. I just feel as if I don't know that there's many players who have struggled fatigue-wise, and my word, it shows, than Ollie Watkins. I really like Ollie Watkins. I think he's great. I do think he's, look, I think I think he's played a lot of football and a lot of minutes. And I kind of got the impression that, when managers say the right things and say, oh, we could get back in, and kind of you think, yeah, like Trent, sort of thing. There's no way back for Trent, is there, after that? Absolutely no chance after his snub. But with Watkins, I did feel it was slightly different in that basically he could, get back in. And I think you'd have to be pretty sort of kind of naive to think then that basically there's not something going on with Watkins. And I think that's just because of the number of games. He does look at times as if he's struggling a bit because of fatigue. He's, a really strong runner. And I think if you look at his level of performance, I just think there's one player that probably needs a rest, and that's Ollie Watkins. But I actually really like the fact then that at club level, whenever he's been kind of left out, he's either come on from the bench or started the next game and scored. And I just think he's phenomenal like that. So maybe he'll have a point to prove and have a phenomenal run until the end of the season. But I still think that Watkins, I know it sounds a bit silly, but basically might just be Harry Kane's natural understudy, because I think he's a bit different. And maybe that's the thing with Tuchel. Tuchel's now thinking, actually, I've got front runners that can do that in kind of Rashford and Gordon, so don't need Watkins. But I still think he's a bit more of a classic, front-running centre-forward.
It makes you wonder whether there might have been, Tuchel may have explained to Watkins, look, you need a rest. I'm going to give you a rest now.
Absolutely.
Work hard, get yourself back up to full fitness, and when it comes to the World Cup squad, you're still in contention if you're playing well. Got to talk about Tino Livramento. At fault for Sunderland's late winner in the Tyne Weir derby, falling asleep at the back post.
It's not been a great week for Newcastle fullbacks, to be honest.
Not particularly.
Because Lewis Hall has had a couple of dodgy ones.
It's him as well, yeah. But in the context, it's not a great look in the sense that just pipping, as you mentioned, Trent Alexander-Arnold to a spot in England's squad. We talked a lot on Friday about how you and Jeremy Cross were surprised that it wasn't. Well, not necessarily surprised, but just almost dismayed at how England have kind of failed to get the best out of Alexander-Arnold. I know Trent is not exactly the bastion of defensive stability.
He's not Paolo Maldini as a fullback, is he? No.
Not quite. So, sort of suggesting, Tino Livramento made a big mistake, therefore why are we not trying Trent? But do you think Tuchel will regret not, at the very least, bringing Trent along to this big camp where he's looking at loads of different players, just in the sense that you've had a bad week for Livramento. Jed Spence, who's the other right-back who pipped Trent Alexander-Arnold, involved in another heavy Spurs defeat, got hooked halfway through the second half. Will he regret not at least looking at Alexander-Arnold and testing him out? Had a decent week at the game at the weekend for Real Madrid. It set up Vinicius Junior's goal against Atletico Madrid. Is this not a thing that Tuchel will come to regret?
I personally don't think he'll regret it, and I don't think he will regret it, simply because I think he's so single-minded that he, I think he's made up his mind on Trent Alexander-Arnold. Mm. And as I say, I think I sort of said on Friday that basically I think it's not about the player and his ability, it's about the profile. And basically he doesn't want that style of fullback. And basically that's not what he sees in this team and this squad. I find that surprising, and I think that's a shame. And I think it's the one glaring mistake from my perspective in the squad. But I just feel as if Tuchel's looked at it and thought, you're not for me. And that's fine, because basically some managers are not going to fancy certain players. And I think that basically, what can you do about that? There's not much you can do about that. The whole of Trent Alexander-Arnold's playing style is being a bit different. And basically being a bit of a kind of maverick. His technique is sublime, absolutely fabulous talent, wonderful player. And his set pieces could have been crucial. But so that's the thing. I just think that Tuchel's made up his mind. And I think as a manager, you've got to stand, live and die by those decisions, basically. And that's why I don't think he, will regret it. I don't think he thinks then that, Trent's not for me. Maybe if he was a kind of a right winger, then we'd be having a different conversation. But if he's a right back, he's just not what he wants defensively, I don't think. I mean, best in the world, how can you justify a squad which has Dan Burn in it and Trent Alexander-Arnold not in it? I mean, come on.
Dan Burn taking some
and that's not, well, that's not, it's not, it's not necessarily against Dan Burn, but it's about the levels, isn't it? And so basically, sometimes it's about the chemistry. It's about what works in the squad. And then also for particular moments. So Dan Burn, all 6'7" of him, might then basically be brought on late on and basically be crucial and at a set piece and be a national hero. Let's hope so, by the way. But I just think then that's really why he's in, isn't it? And basically kind of making that dynamic up. And so I kind of think that's why he's made that decision, I think.
Does this almost give one confidence in Tuchel, in the sense that he's obviously not afraid? I mean, not that we need necessarily reminding of this. We know he's a big character. We know he's obviously left Jude Bellingham out in the past. Does this sort of show that he's willing to go, no, I'm not going to bow to pressure. People would sort of suggest that it's madness to leave Trent out, but he's not the sort of player I want, and I'm going to do that. Does that suggest that he's, somebody who will make those tough calls if indeed some are needed when it comes to picking a World Cup squad or starting 11 or whatever?
Yeah, I do think that it's interesting. I think that it's really, I feel as if that it's good to be strong and single-minded as a manager. Because I think sometimes just doing things because of public pressure is such a bad call. It's a really bad call. And so I think then that basically you've got to do it, be strong, be single-minded. And it's, I think that's the thing, So, yeah.
So England versus Uruguay on Friday. You mentioned there's a few players, I think there's 11 of them who are going to be have staggered arrivals, are going to join up with the squad after the Uruguay game, ahead of the Japan game. So no Kane, no Rice, no Saka, no Gay, no Konza, no Anderson, no Gordon, a few others. What do you expect the team's going to be on that in that game? Is it going to be a case of like a pre-season game where everybody gets a run out, or is he going to go, no, I'm going to play the starting 11 that's the strongest I have available?
Oh, I think he'll go the strongest that he's got available, but then you pick away at what's not there. Do you know what? I do think it's really innovative, and I think that it gets the players on side, it gets the clubs on side, and okay, if I bought a ticket for Uruguay, then I wonder whether I was still thinking, am I excited about seeing the, I don't know, Dan Burn, as I would be, certain others. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? And so. There's that aspect to it, which I think is, a bit of a concern. But equally, I think it heightens the competition, and I think then basically it gives. He did say to us actually, if someone does really, really well, then they actually might stay on until the second week. And so I kind of thought, do you know what? If someone really steps out, I bet someone does make an impression. And basically, I wonder who that might be. Whether it's a kind of a James Garner who kind of catches the eye, or someone like that. Can play multiple positions. Let's hope. It could be really good. But I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I know there's a lot of noise about sort of kind of Declan Rice, wasn't there, for example? But Declan Rice is a player that looks just in need of a break, frankly. And I think that he. It's just nonsense. You see this kind of fallout sort of being cast as overhyped. Well, people need to stay off social media, really, if you're going to sort of kind of talk that about them, because Arsenal fans always sing, don't they, basically, got him half price. I mean, so come on, and he could easily win Player of the Year.
Yeah, still
so come
to
on,
do that.
let's not be silly about this, but basically you allow kind of one off day, even if it's Wembley sort of thing. So I think it's so obvious to me that basically players need a bit of a break. And so, but I just feel as if sometimes it's really fresh and energising to see a different look in England's side. And okay, you don't want it to be completely disjointed and you want to have some familiarity. But I do feel as if it's a great opportunity for some of these guys to step forward and nail a place.
Do you think this is going to be revolutionary in the sense that are we going to be seeing staggered squads a lot in the future? Or is this just a case of...
Purely, I think, for this. I think it's very different. I think, I think it was Tuchel's idea. I think it's basically, backed up by the FA, and I think it makes a hell of a lot of sense. But I also think it speaks to someone who's got a real club head on as well. So I think that basically made it absolutely crystal clear that basically if it were two qualifiers, we wouldn't be entertaining this, not for a moment. So I don't think, therefore, it will be a long-term strategy. But I like it. I think it's a good idea to keep people fresh and interested. And, he was even saying that basically, I was thinking about, he sort of said, could I do something to gather the guys together away from the pitch, do some sort of social, do some sort of thing a couple of days away together?
Right,
Well, I mean, sort of the army base and sort of crawling through mud. Well, no one wants that at this stage of the season, do they?
Not in March.
It's ridiculous.
Wait until June.
Just need a bit of a few days with the family, basically, feet up in front of the telly watching box sets. I mean, that's it's probably better an option as a complete rest than basically crawling through mud and then sort of trying to get over some assault course. Blimey, who wants that? It's ridiculous.
For most of recent England games, Tuchel's gone with that two-man pivot of Rice and Anderson, obviously both unavailable for the Uruguay game. Who do you expect will start in those positions?
Oh, yeah, it's a really difficult one. I do think, I feel as if once you've called up someone like Garner, and then also you've got Jordan Henderson. I think that basically it would be interesting, I think, to kind of, keep... I personally think you've got to see Garner in there as well, in to kind of make sure that remains interesting. You've got an absolute... It's incredible the amount of defenders, fullbacks. I mean, it really is amazing. So... You've got no options there. But I do think the midfield almost looked a little bit light in the central midfield. I don't know what you thought, but
I think
it's almost finding the kind of the numbers there, making it up really, and kind of, because there's the wider pool. You've got Wharton was the one that surprised me slightly, just because I never feel that Tuchel's completely fully invested in the player. I don't know why. I think a lot of people like him. I understand why, because I think he's really good. But I think he's a bit, I don't know, his style, his running style, the way that he plays is a bit bit odd at times. But I just feel as if, you know, that he's a lovely passer of the ball, picks his passes, and is clearly an amazing talent. But I never feel as if Tuchel has been completely... And then, you know, for example, you know, I'm at Bournemouth on Friday night. I can't believe that Alex Scott is not in that squad. Because I do think Alex Scott just ran that game from a midfield perspective. Cunha, you know, sort of basically, you know, played ever so well going forward for United. But in the middle of midfield, I just thought Scott ran the game, you know. So it's a really bit of an odd one, that, you know. So I just feel as if midfield might be an interesting one, that, and I definitely feel as if that will be defined by kind of, you know, I want that to me, that those midfield options spoke volumes to me about it. Yeah, it'll be 4-2-3-1 basically. I think.
What about at centre back? Konza, Guehi, we've kind of talked about are probably going to be the two starters at the World Cup. Again, both unavailable. Who do you expect will get the nod at centre back?
Well, Tomori was the one that really surprised me. And so, because he's just been he's fallen a bit off radar, you know. And I wonder whether he'd have got in if Chalobah had been available. Obviously, Chalobah's injured a bit. So, you know, maybe that's the logical step up for that. But yeah, it feels a bit... I'm actually struggling a bit on a few positions, really, to kind of keep up, because there's sort of kind of, you know, 11,
it's all very
11
out,
isn't
it?
Yeah, it really does feel as if that's a bit of a strange one, really. I don't know. I do feel as if once you've called Tomori, then I feel as if...
You've got to give him a chance.
Got to give him a chance. But then you have to kind of pick the right partner with him. Sorry, Harry, I'm being a bit indecisive here. But I genuinely think, you can hear my brain go clank, clank, whir, whir. And then basically, I
guess it's one to watch. It will be really interesting to see who does get the nod, and that might give us a little bit of an insight into who Tuchel kind of sees beyond that starting 11 that we expect. We kind of think it's probably going to be a shootout between Solanke and Calvert-Lewin for that sort of number 9 role. Obviously, Rashford, another option, possibly, but probably between those two. I just want to ask you a slightly abstract question. Would you rather, if you were in their shoes, would you rather start that game against Uruguay or be the guy who comes on as a second half sub? Now, that might seem like a stupid question, and working with me for a few weeks, I'm probably used to me asking some stupid questions. But I just ask because the role that one of them is going to play, or you know, whoever gets that nod behind Kane, they're probably not going to start at the World Cup. They're going to be coming on as an impact sub. Is it more important for them to prove what they can do from the bench rather than what I can do, you know, over 60, 70 minutes? Because it's obviously very different requirements. You've got to conserve your energy. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. Is it not going to be better for whoever? Let's say it's Solanke who gets the nod to start, and Calvert-Lewin is coming on for the last 20 minutes against Uruguay. Is that the slot that you want, really?
No, that's a really interesting point. I hadn't even thought about it like that. So I think that's interesting, actually. It's funny, isn't it? Because both players, I think, are of a profile where super sub is not going to be the natural, you know. So I wonder whether you're right, that basically maybe they'll get a half each, and it feels more of a natural thing. But I do feel as if Solanke going to make that impact from the bench? I actually think then that maybe that's a little bit, only a little smidgen more suited to Calvert-Lewin making an impression. Just because of his, you know, perhaps his mobility and, you know, the way that he can sort of kind of just bring a bit more quality. I don't know. It's a really tight call, that. But I totally get it. I think that basically, I think that's a great shout, that. But I also think it brings us back to the issue of what you do as your backup. Because basically, do you go thinking, well, actually, I'm going to take one other striker than Harry Kane because I've kind of got Rashford or Gordon? I think Gordon we shouldn't overlook. He's been particularly, he's been better, isn't he? I think is through the middle for Newcastle, and he's wide. So I think then that would be that. And therefore, I wonder whether in the end, you know, he'll be making a call on kind of does he go for a backup for Kane, or does he go someone a different profile? And I just think, I think you're right. I think it's a straight shootout, and it'll be, 45 v 45 rather than kind of super sub role. So I think it'll be really interesting to see who starts. Personally, I'd be going Calvert-Lewin. I think I loved, him talking. I did a piece with him back in December, and he was talking about his pride and what it meant for playing for England. And I love that. I love that. So I've become horribly biased towards Calvert-Lewin, I have to say. But I do think that, Solanke, I think, has got a really, interesting career trajectory. There's no doubt about it. He's stepped up and he's a good quality striker, I suppose. But I just feel as if he'd probably admit that actually this season's been so stop-start for so many reasons that he's not at his best. He's not, done himself justice, I would say.
Just to wrap us up, Harry Kane, another goal at the weekend. That makes 48 for the season. One of the Ballon d'Or favourites as things stand.
Yeah.
Now, I know you've described yourself in the past as chairman of the Harry Kane Appreciation Society, but is he in the form of his life right now? Or are we only noticing because he's playing for Bayern Munich, not Spurs?
Oh, no, he's in the form of his life. Did you see his goal against Atlanta? I mean, wow. Honestly, if we see him this kind of coming week, I'd definitely be thinking about asking him basically about, is that in your show reel of your top 5 goals? If you haven't seen it, do yourself a favour. The ball comes into him and basically he's got 2 centre-halves around him, hasn't he? And basically he looks completely and utterly locked out. And actually one makes a challenge where he could probably go down and win a penalty, but actually stays on his feet and kind of with a twist and a turn, he somehow slaloms between both of them. And I just don't know quite how he does it. And then in the next action, he's absolutely swept the ball home in an unstoppable fashion into the top corner.
I don't know how he got the technique.
It's just unbelievable.
It's very Luis Suarez-esque, just that sort of incredible, kind of unfathomable technique, both getting through a load of defenders in a tight area and then producing an incredible technique to...
Well, it's really interesting that you say Luis Suarez, because I think if Luis Suarez would be doing it, we'd be celebrating from the rooftops and be going... And maybe this is being too close to the action, and maybe this is a bit of a media thing, but I just don't feel that he always gets enough respect or credit, and basically we should be shouting from the rooftops. And the fact that I've seen that goal makes me think, well, actually, I'm shooting down my own argument here. But that was a brilliant goal, and basically takes some beating, unstoppable Harry Kane. But I do also think that basically that shows that England will be taking the best number 9, I think, on current form to the World Cup. And I know people will say, including myself, Mbappe, but it's not quite the classic 9. And then basically different players and different profiles. He's better than Lewandowski now. Lewandowski, with great respect, has a marvellous career, and you watch that game, and, he does score goals against Newcastle, but equally, he wasn't involved in the game that much, and basically Kane is the all-round complete player who can drop deep and provide and so on. I just think Kane is maturing into an absolute unstoppable force. And right now, you'd have to say, if you're selecting your Ballon d'Or shortlist of 3, for example, Kane would surely be on it. Absolutely deserves to be. Having the season of his life. And I think then that basically, is that a Bayern Munich thing? Well, I think that they'd certainly feed him and they play to his strengths. But my word, I think Harry Kane is also playing, fantastic. And his passing and his work rate, his ability, his kind of sixth sense, almost feel like saying 7 sense, because he's just got the incredible awareness of what's going on around him, basically. It's something to behold.
Yeah, fingers crossed we get this version of Kane at the World Cup.
And not the half-fit one who's just got a niggle.
Yeah.
And I think that's why this squad makes so much strength. Don't risk it with any players. Yeah. Don't. No. And I think that's why Tuchel's done a bit of a stroke of genius here, because he knows from club management what it takes and basically what it needs. And I think it's the perfect recipe,
Lovely stuff. Thank you, John.
Pleasure.
Well, that's a wrap for this week's edition of our Player Racing series. Head on over to Mirror Football to have your say on who should stay and who should go as part of Thomas Tuchel's World Cup squad this summer. And don't forget to subscribe to Make Football Great Again. We're on YouTube, Apple and Spotify. And we've also just launched our gigantic 2026 World Cup preview series where we're sitting down with a representative from every single nation heading to the tournament this summer to find out more about the countries, the coaches, the fans, the teams, all of that malarkey. You don't want to miss it. Until next time, keep making football great again.